Welcome to SAFUI, the podcast of the Africa Indigenous Knowledge Research Network. Your hosts are Dr. Chikezirim Nwoke, an anthropologist studying youth and livelihoods, and
Sika Kudjawu, a doctoral candidate researching the political history of African women, both at Carleton University.
We worked alongside our principal investigator, Dr. Samuel or John Oloruntoba, to bring you these critical conversations, made possible with support from MasterCard Foundation. Let's dive straight into our conversation. Our guest today is Dr. Daniel Salau Rogei. Dr. Rogei earned his PhD from Carleton University in 2001. He's a development consultant based in Kenya and also works in Canada, where he's completing a postdoctoral research and teaching fellowship at Carleton. His research gravitates around the themes of indigenous knowledge, climate change adaptation, pastoralism, and social economic empowerment in East and North Africa. Today's discussion focuses on the livelihoods of the indigenous Maasai community, with an emphasis on the connections to youth empowerment, particularly among women. Welcome, Dr. Rogei.
Thank you very much.
So, Dr. Rogei, may we begin with your journey as a researcher? You work with Maasai communities, and you're Maasai yourself. Could you take us through how your identity and experiences inform and inspire the work that you do?
Yeah, thank you so much, Chike, for this opportunity and for the podcast and for the opportunity to share my experience and the experience of the Maasai community. Yes, I am a Maasai and I'm working with the Maasai communities and also other pastoralist communities and indigenous peoples generally. Before I joined the academic world, I was working with the communities, with the organizations, NGOs, non-governmental organizations. So basically, my background is really around community development. And so I think for about over 10 years, I've worked with communities. I think close to about 15 years before I started pursuing my academia. And what I realized is that there's been a lot of misconceptions and a lot of stereotypes. I myself being the Maasai, and so I was reading and interacting with a lot of literature about the Maasai and documentation about their history and their struggles and everything that they're doing. And all this informed actually development patterns and was shaping the trajectory of development in this community. But what I realized over time is there's a lot of misconception, a lot of stereotypes. And this is what inspired me, because I was like, I really need to correct this because yes, research is done, but then there are a lot of biases. Well, sometimes it's not really academic research that's done, but it's also sometimes done by organizations, by various agencies and entities. But then there are a lot of biases that come along with that I thought, even with my experience and my cultural background, I would quickly correct and say, no, this is not true. But then I wanted to put things straight, by working with the community. I mean, researching it in a more scientific way and in an academic way, so that I can have these records straight. And so that is what inspired me to work with these communities. And yes, the challenge has been I myself as a researcher and I myself as a Maasai, and how to put that distinction so I not also be subjective in what I mean, like to put a distance between myself and the communities that I'm studying or I'm working with. And so that is what I'm very conscious about, the back of my mind, so that I shed off my Maasai-ness and come in as an academic really, and as a researcher that is willing to learn. I must admit it's not an easy thing, but it's something that you really have to purpose to do it, so that you don't bring along your what you already know into the space that you are studying. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's something that you can work out when you are very conscious and alive to that fact.
Yes, thank you very much. I as a researcher, I also find it very difficult to create that balance between being part of the community that I study and also being a researcher. So they call it the insider-outsider conundrum. Trying to balance that space or that like conundrum of being a researcher and also being originally a subject, of the place. But I want to ask, what are some of the biases that you found initially before like going into the academia and focusing on the Maasai academically? What are some of the biases of the development world and also maybe of researchers that you found among those studying the Maasai? If you could share some.
There are quite a lot, and particularly touching around the cultural practices, because some of these cultural issues are very sensitive. And as much as you think your informants are going to tell you nothing but the truth, they will always tell you what you want to know, and won't really get deeper into really the essence of some of these practices. And so you will find that what is documented, there are a lot of gaps that are filled in sometimes by researchers and using just grey literature, like even from the documentaries, the safari documentaries, or the newspapers, media, and all that. Some of them are even gutter presses, and they just write whatever people feel like they should write about. But there are a lot around roles, like gender roles, and men's roles, women's roles. And there's always this which has been hyped to be seen to be like, well, women are overworking, men are not. But you'll find that in these communities, these roles are clearly, really, they are very distinct. And when you talk to what the women do, they are very comfortable doing what they are doing. But somebody from outside might perceive and say, no, we feel like women are overworked. They shouldn't be doing this. They are getting water for domestic use. They are getting firewood, and men just seems like loitering around. But if you also get to see what the roles of men are, it's something that women also don't desire to do, because it's difficult for them, like taking care of livestock and protecting them from predators like lions, especially during the hardships times of droughts. They have to be taken to very risky places. So that pressure on men is also huge, and something that women don't. So get those balances in terms of what they really mean, not really just from like the perspective of what people are doing at the point in time when they are found to be doing. And some of these courses are really seasonal based. So you'll find a season where maybe men might be relaxing because it is a rainy season and livestock seems to be just lazing around. But those are very few moments in the cycle of in a seasonal cycle, like only 2-3 months. 7 months in a year, some of these men do not even get home throughout the year. And so sometimes a lot have been always passed to mean that. But you realize that some of these biases are being driven by mainly NGOs who want to get into finance pools that can be able to finance their activities. And these finances and the conditions in the sense of donors also have their own interests, and the areas that they want to fund. And sometimes people just want to tap into those areas by whatever means, and so craft some information, not necessarily true, but as long as it can appeal to the donor, and it doesn't really matter. So those are some of just among the many. I think the other issues have been around, like as I said, sensitive cultural practices, like the Maasai community practice, for example, FGM, female genital mutilation. And a lot has been documented about that, but a lot is really so much subjective, so to speak. And I'm not researching in that area, but I'm just giving an example of areas that I find that there are a lot of biases.
Thanks for sharing that, Dr. Rogei. You make an interesting point about how touchy some of these conversations are, and how cultural practices have to be examined through a critical lens. Recent decades have seen significant changes impacting the traditional Maasai way of life regarding pastoralism and associated cultural practices. Drawing on your research, can you elaborate on the current state of Maasai livelihood, particularly in relation to climate change and so-called modernity?
There's been a lot of changes. Actually, the traditional Maasai way of life and the associated livelihood practice, which is mainly pastoralism, has been impacted for close to now actually a century since the advent of colonialism. I think that's where it all began, because on the onset of colonialism, the colonialists eyed one of the best, grazing areas and the lands that are rich with resources, water, and grass, and that have also, through indigenous ways and practices and experiences over time, these communities have also identified some of the areas that best suits their way of life. And so when they are dispossessed of those areas, then they are relegated to some corners that are maybe full of diseases and pests, and they experience a lot of droughts and all those kind of challenges. So right from that point in time, the Maasai started experiencing these difficulties. And during independence period, that is in the 1960s, that's when Kenya gained independence, 63 actually to be specific. The Maasai community, alongside other indigenous and pastoralist communities, but particularly the Maasai, they could not go back to their original lands because when power changed hands, then they also lost these lands to the new government that was coming in, and communities that are more dominant and are close to the political power. And so they were relegated to drier lands, down in the Rift Valley, which is more drier and susceptible to droughts and diseases. And as their livestock numbers started spiraling, going down, and so it has been a difficult time for them. And now, fast forward, now in the last few decades, that's now when they started feeling also the impact of climate change. I think in the last about 30 years or so, it started being now very frequent droughts that they could not be able to sustain in terms of adaptation, because these are mobile communities, these are nomadic communities, and they would best adapt to climate change impacts, like, for example, severe droughts, by moving around. They practice transhumance, moving from one place to another. And all this has been curtailed because of, one, they have lost high potential areas that they could move to during the time of drought to cushion themselves. But then secondly, there's been, I think, again, in the last 30, 40 years, Kenya has gone through a process of land demarcation. And so land demarcation means privatization of land. The communities were owning land communally, and were using customary ways of managing those resources by sharing and by moving around. But then the land tenure changed to, first of all, group ranches, and then privatization in the individual ranches, which again opened another Pandora box of land selling. And all this means that the land continued to reduce, and not only reducing, but continued to challenge their capability to move around. So by the time climate change and droughts are coming in, when mobility is required the most, it becomes difficult to practice because of the changing land tenure system. Then they become very vulnerable and very susceptible to droughts that were previously not very common, but now are very, very frequent. Like every other 1 year, there's a bad drought. So by the time they rebuild their stock, their livestock, maybe 1 or 2 years, then there's a very, very bad drought that can wipe off their livestock, and then people go back to zero in terms of livestock ownership. So that has been a very big challenge. Two, they have also lost a lot of their land to conservation policies. A lot of conservation areas in Kenya, you've heard of Maasai Mara, Mbuseli, all these are very huge conservation, very popular globally. And all this has been taken away for conservation from community lands. And so it becomes very inaccessible to them. And so these are some of the current challenges that the Maasai have encountered, and now in the advent of, this era now of climate change. And also Nairobi, which is the capital city, is still in Maasai land and is expanding way into these traditional grazing spaces. And that has been also very impactful in terms of encroachment and the modernity and cultural change. And so there are so many issues around that urbanization that's coming along with that's approaching into Maasai land. And so these are some of the challenges, but the net effect of all this is that people are becoming poorer than before. They're becoming less resilient to drought. They're becoming susceptible to what I would call cultural pollution, in the sense that there are now some encroachment and mixing with other communities, and their cultural values are fast eroding.
That was really, really insightful. Thank you, Dr. Rogei. In the context of what you just discussed, can you share some innovative approaches or adaptations that the Maasai are adopting to navigate these challenges while also trying to preserve their cultural heritage, of course?
I think what I would call are quite success stories of diversifying their way of life and adapt to all these changes is tapping into the tourism industry because of their culture, which sometimes it's regarded as the sixth big animal, because the tourism industry in Kenya only sells this magical Kenya saying with the big five. The big five, of course, being the 5 big mammals that are present in Kenya, and the lion, the buffalo, the elephant, 5 of them, the rhino, and now jokingly, the Maasai would say now we are the 6th of that, because tourism would really want to get that experience of their culture. And so they have tapped into that, and also because of the conservation, the so-called community-based conservation approaches that has picked up around in the 90s, 2000, because of the challenges that have previously arose regarding human-wildlife conflict, because all this wildlife being confined in an area that are not accessible by communities, and so that division and exclusive kind of conservation approach has been very problematic. And the areas around these conservation areas, which are highly militarized with military and all that, and protecting wildlife, but still this wildlife come out and prey on this livestock, and so it created an enmity between the Maasai, the community, and the wildlife. And so to bridge that gap, the CBA concept, this community-based conservation, the CBC, which was like now for communities to be able to benefit from conservation. They came up with the community conservancies around these conventional protected areas. And so in a way, that way, they have also, then they get to tap into the tourism industry, because the safari, guys also come and visit their conservancies and view the wildlife and interact with the people, and they could make money out of that. So most of the sections of the communities really are benefited from that. Another one is their artifacts, which is really a huge trademark for the Maasai, and the beautiful jewelry and beadwork. And this is basically preserved for women. It's really an area, an expertise. Women do all the jewelry work and the beadwork. And this is really generational kind of practice. Well, before it was just for beauty, but now it has taken a turn of still used for even for just beauty for cultural festivities in the communities. But these are products that many people in the world over are happy to use. And so the women have organized themselves in various ways, in smaller groups, and working with different self-help organized groups, and supported by some maybe NGOs, organizations, and all that. But recently, I think about 5 years ago, the previous regime of Kenyan government came in strongly to form what is called the Ushanga Initiative. Ushanga is Swahili word for beads. So Ushanga Initiative then became quite prominent and was entrenched into one of the ministries in the government and being funded by the government to be able to promote the women. And so they could go do exhibitions outside the country and also promote tourism, but again, promote their products and sell. And so this has really improved the economic well-being of the women and of the many households. So it has become another alternative, to livestock keeping, and various other activities that these households will do to earn a living. And so that is something that is very important to the Maasai, because my take on that is that it's really a fusion of culture and the commercial aspect of it, because this is a technique that is really very authentic and very original to these women, and it's something passed on from one generation to another. And the patterns of this beadwork are very, very generic. They have various meanings and all that, and how to pattern the colors and all that, bring out various themes and various purposes. It's a specialty, it's something very special and very unique. So it embodies the indigenous knowledge that has been, brought forward for generations. Then the mix of modernity into it, and then the thing is, they are very flexible to adapt to the various demands markets. If the Chinese like this kind of colors, like yellow, green, they will quickly adapt to that. Than in the West, in the US, for example, they like these other kind of patterns in terms of coloring. They are very quick to adjust themselves to that, and so I think it's something that is quite unique to the community right now.
Thanks for sharing that. I did not know that different beads and different artifacts had different meanings. And I'm happy to own a couple of Maasai beads. Good to know. This leads us to the question of indigenous knowledge, like you mentioned briefly, and the sustainability of intergenerational livelihood transfers. How is this traditional knowledge being passed through from one generation to another? What does youth empowerment entail for the Maasai pastoralists?
The transfer of indigenous knowledge, that's very important from one generation to another. I think that's a very, very critical issue, because modernity, and particularly education, which the Maasai have now embraced with the younger generations. And what does this mean? It means that the knowledge holders, the older people, may not have time and space to be able to share the way they used to share because of all these changes around them. And now that the young people have gone to school and busy with the schoolwork and homework and everything, of course, that time and opportunity to learn from the older generation is significantly reduced. And so that's a huge gap. But for some reason, at least so far, it has survived, because I find very young people, very beautiful women, youthful girls, even those who have gone to school. I don't know whether it's because they still have to help their mothers during holidays and all that, and so at that point they pick it up. It is still working. So, but it is a point to follow through in the next generation. I mean, like now the current young educated women who are like doubling up, doing this work part-time, but also, pursuing their other interests in terms of school and careers, whether they will be able to find time to pass this knowledge to their children. And so I was involved in another project and another organization that was trying to see how this can be entrenched into the school curricula in the Maasai land areas, so that it becomes part of the syllabus that these kids learn in school, so that if they don't get it at home, they get it in school, especially like the lower level classes, lower primary school or elementary school, and primary school generally. Well, that was not at that point in time was not picked up by the system, the authorities, but I think there's an opportunity now, because Kenya is shifting to, I think for the last about 3-4 years now, has been shifting to another form of what is called CBC, competency-based curriculum. CBC involves a lot of practicality, a lot of practice, a lot of work, practically by the learners. And so it's like really a big shift from the system that they were using before. And this, because it is so much of practice-based.
Yes, thank you very much for that. Still dwelling on the beadwork, which I find really, really fascinating. It's more fascinating to me because women have often been excluded or minoritized in discourses of pastoralism in African societies. So encountering the fact or hearing the fact that the beadwork is a way to remove the center from, the cattle rearers to also the women who play a large role in society is really interesting to me. So can you comment on some of the economic roles of women in the community and how their roles fit into the broader context of the Maasai society?
Well, as I said earlier, other factors held constant, and before the whole system was standardized during colonial and post-colonial changes that came along, the roles were clearly cut out. Women had their own roles and the men had their own roles. But of course, many things have changed over time, and especially because of the demands that are there, like resources that are required to be able to meet basic needs at the household level, like education for children, healthcare, better life and all that. And so this now means that everybody would have to participate in some form of economic activities. Looking at it from I think from the cultural point of view, the roles were quite balanced. But now when we come into the new form of economic roles, which were never there before, and now things are changing a bit, are shifting a little bit. And women also participate in other activities that they were not participating before. Like, for example, even the markets are there to sell milk into, and that becomes like the domain of women, milking cows and selling the milk, of course, preserving some for the household, but selling the excess and to use the money to support the family in one way or another. Selling of manure is also another aspect that kind of another domain for women. I don't know how it has come about, but when the cash economy came in, just automatically some of these things became like, that's like for women. I guess because the whole cow belongs to a man. Of course, ownership of property, as we know, like in most of the societies in Africa, the head of the household owns the land, owns the cattle, and all these like capital stuff. But all this, what I would call like byproducts of this livestock, like the real cow could be sold by a man, but there are protocols even within society that still these cows belong to a woman, especially because in this pastoralist setting, and particularly the Maasai also, polygamy is practiced, okay, where a man have more than one wife. And so that means, to be fair and to balance off the ownership of resources within the household, these cattle are divided among different wives. Like you say, these are my cows, and they are hers. Of course, they are overall all belong to the man, but women have some extent of authority over them, if they are ascribed, or rather they are allocated to you, a number of them. And a man cannot just access it without the authority of the woman. These are very salient issues that are sometimes overlooked and are interpreted to mean that men own these properties. And they own it by name, but actually, in real practice, unless you get authority, an express authority from your wife, you cannot just sell it and use it for the good of the rest of the entire family, unless you also have viewers that are there that are specifically just your cows, and now you can sell and do whatever you want with them, but you cannot access your wives without her consent. You see how that is very delicate, and especially now when we are now in the economy of selling and buying, selling the cows to get money. That was not the issue before. So these are new changes that have come with the various economic changes and all kind of lifestyle changes that have come along. And so women now can access resources in various ways and have the freedom to do that, because they also have the freedom to go and sell some of the stuff like the jewelry and participate in various activities like those around the tourism industry, and go to markets and sell their handicrafts and artifacts and get money and use it for their own needs at home. And so it is open, and what the net effect of this, a positive one, because I think the only part that that I would say the women were not proactive, but I can say they were a bit marginalized or suppressed, is the part of decision making. Decision making generally pertaining the whole community, leave alone at the family level, but the entire community and maybe the broader discursive issues like leadership and politics and all that. So that is like mainly the domain of men. But over time, because of this economic empowerment, so to speak, women getting so much involved in economic activities, selling milk, selling jewelry, selling this and that, and have also even are very innovative in doing some things that were not done before, like keeping chicken and even selling them. So these are very new stuff, new things, new practices in the community. Women are in those front lines of trying to pilot some of these small innovations, and all that means is that they get money, and by doing so, over time, my experience and my observation is that women are becoming very proactive in engaging in other broader community issues, and even getting into political space. Okay, they even vying for some of these political seats and shaping the decision making and shaping the kind of leadership and who to be elected and all that at the conventional now kind of setting, leave alone the traditional setting. The traditional setting is clearly cut out, but for these other ones, the kind of modern governance that we have, they're very much becoming very proactively involved in that.
Thanks for sharing that holistic picture around women's economic empowerment and how that relates to their political participation, their social circles and network, and even culturally. Back to the topic of beadwork, how specifically is this craft changing power relations in the private and public sphere, in the households, and when women go outside of their household, outside of the domestic space?
I think the power is shifting, and I think it's now becoming more or less evenly distributed or close to that. Like women are also now, and as I said earlier, by virtue of them being very proactive in the economic activities and bringing in money into the family, the resources that are badly needed, because remember, because of climate change also, that's also affecting the men's economic base, because if our cows die, men becomes very vulnerable. Of course, the entire household becomes vulnerable, but the one who bears the brunt are men, because even traditionally they're the ones who should make sure that livestock survive strenuous times, by taking them wherever they would, and so now they are helpless. The cows die, and who will save the day is the women, who have like ability to access so many small innovative activities. And I would want also to say that women are very, very organized in form of small self-help groups, doing table banking, merry-go-round, saving schemes. And by doing so, they have a lot of cash flows going around them. And that has softened the relations between them and men. And that is also what has caused them to be able to influence various decisions, including very political decisions, as I've said, even at the community at large, and at the political space. So I would say that the power has really shifted. Like, it is not so much now strongly patriarchal, still is, but not that hardcore, not that really extremist kind of patriarchal society as it is. There's that balancing of, it is silent, it's not acceptable. Like, men will not accept that, oh, now we have ceded some ground in terms of power and all that and that decision making. Of course they don't, but practically things are shifting, and I would attribute this to the economic empowerment of women, the various innovative activities that they involved around. And there have also been a lot of initiatives that have gone towards supporting women empowerment, from organizations, NGOs, to even government. You'll find women empowerment fund, coming through the national government, the county government. Many organizations are working towards that, to promote beadwork, promote, I don't know what, everything that women are doing. So there is a lot of empowerment that's going there. In the future, what I fear is the empowerment of the boy child. I think it is threatened. Because even in terms of scholarships, education opportunities, boarding schools for girls, because they are vulnerable to early marriages, they cannot walk long distances and all that. So there are a lot of initiatives that are shifting base, actually, because everybody is overlooking the boys, and I fear that in the future it will become the other way around. When we are talking of affirmative action, it will be about men catching up with women and not the other way around. I see, Sika, you doubt that.
I don't doubt it, but then I think it falls within a specific conversation that is happening around reverse discrimination and all of that. I hear it, but then
you think it's a long way to go, like.
So I would say that it is women that have come together to advance equality for women, and so men need to also come together to not in the sense of it being competitive, right? But also uphold men's access to opportunities and rights, right? So that otherwise you place the burden of protecting the boy child on women, and then men are liberated from that, from their roles, right? Because I wouldn't expect that a person with disability. I don't expect a person with disability to come in to support me as a fully able person. So when it comes to this conversational identity, I feel like common interest groups should be formed to support themselves. And so I completely see what you're doing, because there are more girls in tertiary schools, in tertiary institutions than boys. More girls are getting educated globally, and so there is a shifting change. But then that burden of that responsibility shouldn't be placed on women. Right? Men should come together and work on that. Yes, that's just my opinion.
Yes, I understand that. So, Dr. Rogei, wonderful insights, and I see that we're getting somewhere, but I want to somehow also not pivot, but dive a bit deeper. So it is clear at this point that the contributions of women are vital for maintaining the household, the modern, in quote, household and community among the Maasai, particularly in these challenging times. But we know that women also encounter some barriers in their entrepreneurial efforts, which you've already hinted on a few, but we want you to elaborate on that. So now that we see more women becoming entrepreneurs, taking up this beadwork, taking up the sales and the organization of the residual products of livestock, and also using their networks and small scale or small financial networks to build enterprises. What are some of the barriers they face in terms of the barriers in the community or in the society? Could you speak on that a little bit?
In as much as we are saying that women would overtake the girl child, would overtake the boy child, but I think there are still a lot of barriers. There's still a lot of barriers that are gender specific, that curtails the women, from moving as fast as they would wish to, because first of all, there's still a lot of cultural roles that are very women specific, and like, for example, taking care of children and having water for domestic use, and there are so many roles that are still like these are women roles, and the men may not be able to get into that domain. Cooking for the family, getting food, cooking for them, preparing meals, and so this will definitely curtail or becomes a barrier in the sense that you have this time to split between taking care of your family and going out to do business. And so that poses really a very big challenge. And then also the challenge of the capital that is required, the seed funds, seed money that is required for them to be able to take off. And that's why they have surmounted that kind of obstacle by mobilizing themselves into self-help groups, accessing funds, maybe in these organizations, in the government and all that, to be able to overcome that. But still a very big challenge by the fact that they don't access really huge capital, like selling a cow or selling something bigger than that. And so just small saving schemes, which means they cannot really take off by investing in bigger businesses. And so these are the challenges that are there, and it becomes really an impediment for them to be able to take off. And still in terms of education, over time, there's been, especially in the Maasai community, focus has been to the boys because girls would be married off at some point and raise, dowry in form of cows that will be used for household or be rebuilding the stock. So being able to access such opportunities becomes difficult because, as I said, academically, of course, most of them did not have access to that opportunity. So you'll find still many of them are illiterate. I have encountered quite a number of women selling beadwork to the tourists around these big protected areas around Maasai Mara Game Reserve and all that. And language is really a very big issue, but although a few of them have learned English a little bit, French, depending on how many tourists and from where come there, but still a very big problem to most of them, because most of them cannot be able to speak any other language other than the indigenous language. And so as much as they would want really to sell the product, you cannot be able to market it. You cannot be able to express yourself and be able to sell. But also still, I also realize that they still limited in terms of how they organize themselves to really become impactful to the market. And there are so many brokers in the middle that are taking advantage of that. So you'll realize that those who are getting access to even international market to sell their products, they're doing so through other parties, because of these limitations. And what that means is that they lose a lot of value for their products. But again, also another even bigger risk is the patenting and the copyrights of those kind of jewelry that they make. It is their innovation, it's their actually should belong to them. But we have experienced cases where instances where some of these products have been patented by foreigners, and now belong to like there's a neighboring community who do weaved baskets. It's called Shiondo. They are known for that. Actually, that community is even named by that because they use sisal fibrous, kind of material to do very nice and colorful bags. And so a Japanese company patented that, and now it belongs to them, and it has also happened to the Maasai in so many ways, and where they use their knowledges and what would be regarded as their rights, but they are not compensated for it. And so there are still a lot of issues to be addressed for them to be able to benefit from this entrepreneurship that is evolving in the community.
Yes, building on what you just mentioned, we've spoken to some form of partnerships that these women form, including cooperatives, stable banking activities. What other forms of collaboration will be beneficial to not just address the challenges that you just spoken to, but then to scale up their activities, and what would scaling up look like for these women?
Partnerships will really help. Besides the partnerships of self-organization within themselves, but those groups to be able to partner with other like-minded groups at other scales, at other levels, at the national level, groups that are not like taking advantage of or like seeing a business opportunity that they could, act as mid-row people and mid-row traders, but groups that are facilitative in nature, partnerships that are facilitative, to facilitate them to access and have full benefits of the products that they are selling at the national or at the international level. And so those are the kind of partnerships that are really desired, those which will seek to facilitate, but not to exploit, if I may say that. Okay. And so partnerships also with financials, with financial organizations, that would also help quite a bit, by way of scaling up the development of these products and the marketing of these products, because finances are always an impediment, and any partnership that would be able to enhance the financial base and enhance their capacity to be able to produce at scale and maximize on these productions, that would be very, very helpful. Technical partnerships is important because various markets need various approaches. What I realize is that, yes, they have the knowledge of really producing, but this is informed by their cultural, traditional knowledge, what fits them. And this is relative, because an ornament or an artifact that a Maasai woman would say, this is really, really nice, it's perhaps not what Sika would say, this is really nice. she might want something adjusted, like certain color, the pattern, blah, blah, a little bit. So those are some small technical issues that could really make a very big difference. But that can be sourced from elsewhere, like people who would guide them towards specific markets and what is required in that market. And so, yes, so partnerships are really very critical. And also in governments, because I think also there is lack of policy frameworks, to be able to facilitate this and protect, especially from being exploited, and protect the patent regimes or develop the regimes and actually protect them so that their knowledge is not expropriated. And so those are what I can point out as maybe something that still need to be the kind of partnership and support that these groups might need.
Thank you so much. This brings us to the end of our conversation. We've had a very rich and generative, robust conversation around the Maasai women's beadwork.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you for tuning in to SAFU, the podcast of the Africa Indigenous Knowledge Research Network. Our aim is to complement existing initiatives on the regeneration and application of indigenous knowledge for sustainable livelihoods, while identifying promising areas for African women's and youth entrepreneurship and employment across various sectors. The network is headquartered at the Institute of African Studies, Carleton University, with partnerships across the African continent. Want to stay engaged? Connect with us on YouTube at AIKRN Online, or consider applying to join our network at africaindigenousresearch.com. Until next time, keep the dialogue going.